Hi, I'm John Stevenson. We're going to be looking at the question of history as we begin a series on the history of civilization. What is history? When we ask that question, the first person that comes to mind is Herodotus, who actually wrote his book entitled The Histories. But by that, he's exploring the idea of certain lessons that can be learned from events that happened in the past. Of course, when we say history, we think of things that happened in the past. The problem is that we don't know everything that happened in the past, and indeed to tell everything that happened in the past, we would need all of past time in every location. It sort of reminds me of what the Gospel of John says, that there were many things that Jesus did, so many that if we tried to write them all down, the whole world could not contain all the books, and that's just the life of one person. If we multiply that by however many people there have been, there'd certainly be an abundance. So when we look at history, we are dealing with a selection of certain aspects of what's taking place. We're looking at the big picture. Now, one of the issues that we come with in looking to history is the problem of revisionism. This is illustrated by this scene, borrowed this off the internet. This is an old cowboy movie, and you notice the cowboys are in their covered wagons, and the Indians come, and they're like riding around in circles around the covered wagons, and they're I guess once in a while shooting the arrows, and the settlers are behind the covered wagons, and they're shooting bang at the Indians, and if they miss, it's okay, because that Indian's he's gonna come around again, and they're just going round and round, and the Indians don't look all too smart. And of course the Cowboys are going to win in the end, because this is sort of a cowboy story. Now, flash forward a bunch of years, and we have a different movie taken from an old novel, but The Last of the Mohicans. And in this case, you have the Indians. They're the heroes of the story, and they're the ones that take aim and they fire, and then when the bad guys shoot back at them, they hide behind trees, and they're much more intelligent. And what's happened isn't that the history changed; it's just that the telling of the history changed. And so we have that take place, not just in recent times, but we had it take place in ancient times as well. An example of this is seen in the story of Moses and the Exodus, where we have the people of Israel. They leave Egypt and they go through the Red Sea. Some folks translate that, and properly so, the Red Sea. It's still the same place. It's just the Egyptians call that the Red Sea, and we call it the Red Sea. Same location, but they travel through the waters, and then the Egyptians seek to go through the Red Sea, and the waters come together, and the Egyptian armies are destroyed. We go, however, to the Egyptian side of that, and we find no historical record of that. And not only that, we never find any historical record of the Egyptians ever losing a battle anywhere, even when we have certain battles that are described, and yet we have the other side describing a battle. For example, the Egyptians are going to fight the Hittites, and the Egyptians tell the story about how they won, and the Hittites tell the same story, the same battle, and they say, we beat the tar out of them. And they ran all the way back to Egypt, and they never showed their face again. And actually, that's the way it sort of turns out. We don't see Egypt ever again, at least for a lot of years, not leaving Egypt again. Their raiding parties to other parts, to other countries, just ceased dramatically, which suggests strongly that the Egyptians were lying. They weren't telling the truth. So history is not, first of all, history is not predictable. Yes, there are biblical prophecies, but even prophecies can be sort of a hazardous thing. My normal outlook on the subject of Bible prophecy is that Bible prophecy is a lot easier to interpret after it's been fulfilled. For example, we have lots of prophecies about what the Messiah would be like, and then Jesus came, and nobody recognized him, or a lot of people didn't recognize him, and the way he came was so very different than what they expected, even though his coming was prophesied in so many different prophecies of the Old Testament. And so history, even when you've got prophecy, I would say, history is not really predictable. Secondly, history is not repeatable. One of the Greek philosophers used to say that you can never step into the same river twice. That is, you can step into a river and then step back, but that river has changed when you step back into it because the water that you would have stepped into the first time has flowed. And even though there may be events that are similar later on in history, and sometimes we talk about how history repeats itself, but it doesn't really repeat itself. It's not really repeatable because each time is different. History is not alterable. We can't go back and change history. Now we can change the telling of it. We can research it. We can maybe be more accurate, or just like we saw the problem of revisionism. Sometimes the way we tell history is changed for good, or sometimes not for good. But history itself is not alterable, and it is not reversible once it's taken place. Well, you may go and mitigate things that have happened, but once things have taken place, sort of the damage is done, or maybe the good thing is done. So history is not reversible. In his little book, More Than Dates and Dead People, Stephen Mansfield makes some great points. First of all, he's in speaking about an evolutionary view of history, and I urge you to read the book. There's lots of great things in this. He says that an evolutionary view of history, and he's not espousing it, he's just explaining what that view is. He says the evolutionist says that everything happens by chance. And because of that, why study just things that happen by chance? There just doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. He also says that an evolutionary view of history says that everything is becoming more complex, everything's becoming better. And if everything's becoming better, why go back and study things when they weren't quite so good? Because that just doesn't make sense either. And so what you have is an evolutionary view of history means that history isn't something that's that interesting. An evolutionary view of history says that what happens in the past doesn't have any real meaning for us today. And he disagrees on all three of those points because he disagrees with a fundamental premise, and so do I. He goes on to contrast that with a biblical view of history. A biblical view of history says that God rules history. Even though there still are what we call chance happenings, yet God is in control of those things, and He rules all of history. That God orchestrates history according to how He wants it to end, and that means there's a goal to history. History is going somewhere, and God's involved in bringing about His desired plan, His desired end. Ephesians chapter 1 talks about God who works all things after the counsel of His will. History is an island in the sea of God's eternity. Dr. Mark Cameron used to say that many, many years ago, and I thought about that, and I thought, well, that's sort of interesting until I began to think about eternity, and the idea is history, is time something out of God's realm, and I can't put my head around that. I'm not going to really try to, but history is this period where we live and breathe, and it's His story, but it's bigger than God. That is, God is bigger than history. But it's His story, and it's the story that He has designed. History also is a battleground between two spiritual kingdoms. There's a war going on, and it's not just the wars that we study when we're studying history and civilization, but there's a bigger conflict that's going on, and it's a conflict between light and darkness, and between God and that which is against God. And of course, we know that He's going to win the battle. Indeed, in a major way, He has already won the battle.